Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about Act 1, Scene 5 of Macbeth by William Shakespeare. So as per usual, you need to be familiar with the scene before you continue the video, so please, you could read it, you could have listened to it, you could have watched it, or you could have studied it in class. As per usual, in this video we'll start by summarising the plot. I will then look at the key characters, themes, context, quotes and techniques we have in this scene, and finally I'll leave you with a couple of tasks you can complete to solidify your understanding. So, what happens in Act 1, Scene 5 of Macbeth? At the start of the scene we are introduced to Lady Macbeth when she reads Macbeth's letter. Now, I think this shows that Lady Macbeth and Macbeth enjoy a healthy relationship at the start of the play. This is shown through the fact that Macbeth writes his wife a letter. Macbeth has just defeated the Norwegians twice in battle and has met the three witches, or the Weird Sisters, who have given him three prophecies. And he relays all of this information to his wife. So clearly they treat each other as equals, they trust each other, there's a lot of respect in their relationship. When reading the letter, Lady Macbeth learns that two of the three witches' prophecies have come true. So the first prophecy is that you will be Thane of Glamis, which we know is true at the start of the play. The second prophecy is that Macbeth will be Thane of Cawdor, which immediately comes true when King Duncan promotes him to Thane of Cawdor to replace the old traitorous Thane of Cawdor once he had been executed. And the third prophecy, that Macbeth will be king hereafter, has not come true yet. But Lady Macbeth resolves to make it come true. So both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have ambition to be king and queen, but whilst Macbeth doesn't particularly want to act on it at this stage, Lady Macbeth is convinced that she needs to act on it. After reading the letter, or during reading the letter actually, Lady Macbeth fears Macbeth's nature. She says that he is too full of the milk of human kindness. Milk is a distinctly feminine liquid. Pregnant women who've just given birth produce milk to nourish their babies. And if you want to explore the colour connotations of milk, it's white, it's a pure, innocent colour. So what Lady Macbeth is saying is that she thinks Macbeth is almost effeminate, almost too gentle, has womanly qualities. He's too kind. He's not ruthless enough to kill King Duncan and take the throne. And this sort of goes against what the audience knows of Macbeth, particularly from Act 1, Scene 2, when the captain described Macbeth in battle and about how he brandished his steel and his sword smoked with the blood of his enemies, and he unseamed his enemies from the knave to the chaps. He's presented as very masculine, very ruthless, a very strong character. And yet Lady Macbeth is seeming to question his masculinity and strength here. And we will explore stereotypical gender roles at the time the play was written and set. But at this stage you need to know it's very unusual for a woman to question her man in this nature. A little bit later, an attendant, a servant, arrives on the scene to tell Lady Macbeth that King Duncan will arrive at their place tonight. And this news excites Lady Macbeth as it speeds up her opportunity to commit regicide, to kill King Duncan and take the crown for herself as queen and for her husband as king. Lady Macbeth then enjoys a soliloquy. A soliloquy is a type of monologue. Mono meaning one, log meaning like speaker, so one character speaking. It's a type of monologue that Shakespeare loves to use. And in a soliloquy, a character speaks their thoughts for an extended period of time, and only the audience can hear this. So the audience, unless they're mind readers, which I'm pretty sure most of them are not, they have no idea what the characters are thinking, what their hopes and dreams are, what their emotions are. So a soliloquy is a technique Shakespeare employs to share the characters' thoughts, dreams, hopes, emotions with the audience, so they get to understand the characters better. In this particular scene, Lady Macbeth is on stage alone, but let's say she wasn't and there were other characters on stage. None of the other characters could hear a soliloquy, only the audience can hear it. When reading your copy of Macbeth, you might see the technique aside used. An aside is basically a short soliloquy. Again, the character is speaking their thoughts, and again, only the audience can hear it. But it's shorter, it's only a few lines, whereas a soliloquy is a more extended expression of thoughts that the audience can hear, which will go across many lines. So during Lady Macbeth's soliloquy, she asks spirits, she asks the supernatural to unsex her. And this is a very interesting verb choice. She wants to be unsexed. She wants to get rid of those feminine qualities she has, such as maybe being kind and caring and nurturing. And instead, she wants to have masculine qualities, such as ambition and sort of greed for power and violence. She also asks the supernatural to fill her with direst cruelty, so to fill her with evilness. She no longer wants to be a good moral character, she wants to be an immoral character, as she believes that's what she needs to take the throne. And she also asks for her sense of remorse, her sense of guilt to be removed. So she wants these masculine, powerful qualities, she wants to be filled with evilness, and she wants to have no sense of guilt. And she believes if she has these qualities, she can then murder King Duncan and take the throne, usurp the power. At the end of the scene, Macbeth arrives home from his battles and his journeys, and Lady Macbeth reveals her intention to commit regicide, to murder King Duncan. And Macbeth has now been presented as a bit weaker since Lady Macbeth said he's too full of the milk of human kindness. And some of this weakness shows. Macbeth has been ambitious. He knows if he wants to take the throne, killing King Duncan is the most direct way to get to the throne. But whenever he's had that thought, his morality has come in, and it makes him pull at his hair, and it makes his heart knock at his ribs, and it gives him a sort of sickening feeling. He can't bring himself to kill King Duncan, who has been nothing but kind to him and promoted him and has been a good, godly ruler. Whereas Lady Macbeth also has ambition, and she's also aware that the most direct route to the throne is by killing King Duncan, but she now no longer has remorse, and she no longer has goodness. She's full of cruelty. So she decides that, yes, they are going to commit regicide, and she's going to manipulate Macbeth into doing it. At this stage of the play, Macbeth is still uncertain as to whether to kill King Duncan, but Lady Macbeth has most certainly made up her mind and wants to do it. So, who are our key characters in this scene? Of course, there's Lady Macbeth, and it's the first time we meet her in the play. And Shakespeare presents her as a very powerful and assertive character. Now, at the time the play was performed, King James I was on the throne, but his predecessor was Queen Elizabeth I. And if you read the history books, she was called the Virgin Queen. So that meant she never took a husband or a king. Instead, she dedicated her time and effort to being a powerful ruler. And I think Shakespeare has made Lady Macbeth a powerful character to maybe please and curry favour from Queen Elizabeth I, because she would have been a patron to his theatre. Lady Macbeth calls upon the supernatural, so I think she becomes almost like a witch. To my understanding, a witch would be a human female who has asked for supernatural powers, maybe some kind of demonic possession, so she can cast spells and curses and make potions. That's exactly what Lady Macbeth does in this scene. And remember, at the time on the throne, it was King James I, and he really hated witches. He even wrote a book called Demonology about witches. So Lady Macbeth calling spirits upon herself to fill her with evilness and masculine qualities, that would have been really shocking to King James and to the audience. She then asks the supernatural to remove her femininity in favour of getting some masculine qualities. We'll explore a bit later the very clear gender stereotypical roles that the Jacobean society and the Alban society had. And Lady Macbeth breaks or subverts these expectations. And again, that would be very shocking to the audience and to King James I. Lady Macbeth is very ambitious, and she's willing to act upon it. So Macbeth knows killing the king will get him the throne, but he can't bring himself to do it. Whereas Lady Macbeth knows killing King Duncan will get her the position of queen, and she is willing to do it. There's a attendant, a servant, but their only purpose really is to further the plot. And then towards the end of the scene, Macbeth arrives, and he appears fairly weak, particularly when we compare him to that Act 1, Scene 2 description that the captain gave of him being a powerful, masculine, strong man. He now appears quite weak and undecided. And actually, towards the end of the scene, Lady Macbeth sort of bosses him around a bit and sort of gives him instructions. You might know the phrase, "where's the pants" in a relationship? Pants or trousers are a masculine garment, piece of clothing, whereas dresses and skirts are more feminine clothing. So the phrase, who wears the pants in the relationship is saying who is more dominant, who is taking that traditional role of a man, of being man of the household and dominant. And I would argue that in this scene, Lady Macbeth wears the pants, and she decides they're going to kill King Duncan, and Macbeth doesn't really have a say in it, or at least he doesn't defend his opinion particularly well. And at the end of this scene, Macbeth is still undecided. He knows killing the king will get him the throne, but he can't bring himself to do it just yet. So, what key themes are introduced and continue in Act 1, Scene 5? Well, the theme of ambition appears again. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are ambitious. They both want to be King and Queen of Scotland, respectively, but Macbeth is not willing to act on it. He still has his moral compass and this sense of right and wrong, whereas Lady Macbeth has got rid of that when she called spirits upon her. She no longer has that goodness. She's filled with direst cruelty, and she decides they're going to act on it. They're going to kill King Duncan and commit regicide. The supernatural returns in this scene. Previously, the supernatural was very clearly the three witches or the idea of a Christian god. But in this scene, the supernatural appears in the sense of spirits, or maybe the supernatural possessing a mortal entity, a human being such as Lady Macbeth. Again, very shocking, particularly to King James when he watched it, and to a highly superstitious and God-fearing Jacobean audience. The theme of appearance versus reality is really important. Towards the end of the scene, Lady Macbeth subverts her gender role. Normally, the man in the relationship would give instructions and the woman would follow. But she gives an instruction to Macbeth to be deceitful. And she does it through this metaphor. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. It's suggesting that he should, on his surface, on his face, he should look like a beautiful, innocent flower, and he should treat Duncan and everyone nicely and innocently, whereas underneath he should be like a serpent. A serpent is a snake, and some snakes have, poison, have venom in their fangs. So look like you're beautiful, you're moral, you're innocent, but really undercover be deadly and ruthless and evil. And this appearance versus reality theme continues through the play. So, what historical context do you need to know to fully appreciate this scene? Well, as I mentioned earlier, there were very clear gender roles in 17th century England, which we can call the Jacobean era, and in 11th century Scotland, which we can call Alba. And the gender roles were as follows. Men held all the power in society and in relationships. We call this patriarchy or patriarchal. The root of patri is father, I believe it's Latin, and the root of archi or archal is ruler. So it literally means father ruler, all men rule. So in society, men held all the positions of power. They were able to vote, they were able to take jobs that earn money, they were able to buy property, whereas women's roles were really sort of seen as being wives and mothers. And actually, it was a really bad time to be a woman, in my opinion, because women were seen as property of men. So when a daughter was born, she belonged to her father, and her father was able to have a lot of say and influence over what she wore, whether or not she was educated, who she spent time with, what skills she learnt. And then when that woman was married off to her husband then took ownership or control over her and decided again what she wore, what she did with her life, who she interacted with. And this really led to women being treated as second-class citizens. Men could get jobs, earn money, buy property, vote, they had power. whereas women really were seen as mothers and wives and nothing more. They couldn't vote, they couldn't own property, they couldn't take positions of power in society. So the roles were very clear, and most people in society in Jacobean era and in Alba, Scotland, would have followed these gender stereotypes. But not Lady Macbeth. She subverts, she changes these stereotypes on her head. First of all, she and Macbeth are quite equal. We see that in the letter, which is symbolic of Macbeth treating Lady Macbeth as an equal. We then see Lady Macbeth be ruthlessly ambitious and decide to kill the king, which is again rejecting her sort of feminine expectations to look after men. Instead, she wants to hurt King Duncan, particularly when she calls upon the spirits to unsex her. She wants to get rid of those female qualities. She wants to adopt more masculine qualities. And she ultimately, towards the end of the scene, actually decides for both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth that they are going to kill King Duncan. And she sort of wears the pants in the relationship, as it were. She is more manipulative and more powerful than Macbeth, which again is really surprising considering how Macbeth was portrayed as very masculine and powerful earlier on in the act. So I've split the key quote section into 3 bits. We'll start with Lady Macbeth when she reads Macbeth's letter. The first key quote is this: "Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised." So this is Lady Macbeth responding to the witch's 3 prophecies. She says that Macbeth is already Thane of Glamis. She says that Macbeth is already Thane of Cawdor. And here she decides to act upon her ambition. And she says, "And shalt be what thou art promised." I will do whatever it takes to make sure that you get what you are promised, which is being King of Scotland. The second key quote is, "I fear thy nature, it is too full of the milk of human kindness." So when reading Macbeth's letter, Lady Macbeth reveals that she thinks Macbeth is full of like feminine milk, this idea of milky white purity, innocence, weakness, softness, and that he doesn't have what it takes to kill King Duncan and be ruthless and take the throne. Again, really shocking that a woman who would have been seen as a socially inferior would say something about her husband, who's meant to be her social superior, in such a condescending and negative way. The second set of quotes are from Lady Macbeth's Soliloquy when she asks the supernatural to influence her. The first key quote is, "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here." Spirits is a clear link to the supernatural, and the verb unsex is really powerful. She wants to get rid of her femininity, that weakness she sees, and she wants to embrace masculinity and evilness and powerfulness, and she wants to usurp the power and get the throne of Scotland. The second quote from the Soliloquy, "And fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty." I really like the use of the word crown. She could have said fill me from the head to the toe of cruelty, but she already sees herself as a queen, so she uses this imagery of crown. I also find direst an interesting adjective to cruelty, like the most evil cruelty. She wants to be as dark and evil and sinister as humanely and supernaturally possible. Again, this idea of topful, she wants to be full of evilness to the point she's overflowing and it can spill out of her and manipulate Macbeth. She says, "Stop up the access and passage to remorse." A little bit before this, she talks about making her blood thick. So I think it's the idea that maybe remorse and guilt flows around a human body like blood, but if the supernatural can make her blood so thick it doesn't pump around her arteries, that means she can no longer feel guilt and remorse. She wants her blood to sort of thicken. She wants to become hard-hearted and no longer feel guilt. And finally, she says, "Come to my women's breasts and take my milk for gall." And this is a great quote to explore gender stereotypes with, because breasts are significant for women. After childbirth, they produce that white, nourishing, life-giving milk that's so important for babies. But instead, she wants the milk to be replaced with gall. Gall is like bile. It's produced by your body to to break down chemicals, and it's very bitter. I believe it's brown in colour. It's not particularly nice liquid compared to milk. So she wants to get rid of her femininity, and instead of her breasts producing feminine, caring, life-giving milk, she wants her body to produce bitter, evil, breaking down gall, bile. Very interesting imagery there. And the final set of key quotes come from when Macbeth arrives on the scene and Lady Macbeth sort of wears the pants of the relationship and starts giving him instructions. She starts questioning him about King Duncan. Will he arrive tonight? When's he going? And then she makes this declarative statement. Oh, never shall sun that morrow see. King Duncan will never see tomorrow's sun. Basically meaning they are going to kill King Duncan. They're going to commit regicide tonight. And she says it in such a definitive way that there's no sort of wiggle room for Macbeth. He sort of goes along with this plan. When telling Macbeth how to behave, she uses the metaphor, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Again, in a relationship, it would have been typical for the man to give the woman instructions in the Jacobean era and in 11th century Scotland. But here, Lady Macbeth gives Macbeth instructions. Again, it would have been shocking and surprising for the audience. Maybe Queen Elizabeth I, if she had been alive to see the play, she would have liked it because it shows women in power, a bit like she was, a very powerful woman. But I think King James I and the rest of the audience would have found this gender subversion at the very least confusing and maybe a little bit unsettling. And finally, towards the very end of the scene, Lady Macbeth says, leave all the rest to me. Again, she's being very powerful. Normally, the man of the house, Macbeth, would be expected to take action and be in charge of stuff. But she says to her husband, no, don't worry, leave it to me. I'm now unsexed. I'm no longer feminine. I'm quite masculine. I'm no longer moral. I'm quite evil. I no longer feel guilt. Leave the regicide to me. I will take care of this. I'll come up with a plan and I'll make sure that you get that third prophecy of becoming king. And by extension, me becoming queen. So, a really interesting scene. What can you do to solidify your knowledge? You can make notes from this video on a physical copy of the play. You can then try answering the question, how does Shakespeare explore gender roles in Act 1, Scene 5 of Macbeth? I'd take a look. I'll try and write a couple of paragraphs. The first paragraph taking a look at Lady Macbeth and how she wants to unsex herself through the supernatural and get rid of those feminine qualities such as milk, and replace it with evil masculine qualities such as bile and direst cruelty and a lack of remorse. I would then spend another paragraph looking at Macbeth and how earlier in the act he fulfilled traditional masculine expectations as an excellent warrior, but now in his home as a husband, he doesn't seem to exhibit the same kind of masculine power. His wife, as it were, wears the pants in their relationship. She seems to be the one in charge. Okay, well, if you found this video useful for your Macbeth revision, please give it a like. Please also subscribe to my Mr. Hardy YouTube channel so you get updates with the rest of the Macbeth series and future English-related series. And please leave a comment. If you think I've missed out on a key quote or a key technique or a piece of historical knowledge, please add it into the comments and share it with me. I'd love to read it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.